Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I do diagnostic assessment, advocacy, intervention. I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
My name is Kim Sharman. I work with kids from kindergarten through high school, college, and I work with kids with dyslexia and dysgraphia. I'm a remediation specialist
And ADHD.
and ADHD too. And I have it. Sorry.
That's
Sorry, not sorry.
apologizing. You shouldn't apologize for that. All right, so we went into the files and we pulled out another profile to look at. And this one is particularly interesting, and Kim has only seen kind of a glimpse of it. But let's kind of dive in. And once again, please do not, if you're a clinician, don't go in and average scores, because I've gone in and changed scores and I haven't gone back in and done the math to make them perfect. So some scores went up, some scores went down to maintain the individual's privacy, but it's the pattern of scores that is so incredibly important. And we're calling this particular student Emily Post. Um, and so, Kim, this is where most people start, which is the IQ.
Mhm.
And what do you notice?
Well, the IQ is average, but then some of her percentile scores in other areas are high, and there's a lot of low scores too. So it's pretty great variation there.
There's a lot of variation. So this fluid crystallized, this is called the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children, otherwise known as the KABC. I actually like this IQ test a lot. It has the feature of being able, so it's got times subtests on it. It's got 3 times subtests on it that you get bonus points for speed. And it has the option of scoring it without the speed bonus, which is one of the reasons I chose it for this particular student. The other reason I chose it is it's also got what's called a nonverbal IQ.
Hmm.
So what do you think a nonverbal IQ is?
A nonverbal IQ, it is, I don't know, you tell me.
I love
It's
it when
too
you say
blunt.
I don't know, because then parents are like, good, it's okay for me to say I don't
Yeah.
know. A nonverbal IQ is an IQ test based on tasks that don't involve as much language. So there's less language in the instructions, and you're not required to provide a verbally articulate answer, meaning if I ask you to define a word and you are not specific enough, you don't get as much credit on the item. On a nonverbal IQ, there's not that oral response where you have to explain your meaning or you have to articulate. Go ahead.
So one of the things I want parents to realize is that you have spoken with these children before doing the testing. And my guess is you chose this test on purpose because of certain things that you sniffed out. The
Well, yeah. Well, one of the first things that I do with any student is I give measures of processing speed.
mm,
And processing speed being how quickly can you um, kind of take information in, churn it, and do something out. Um, so her processing speed was fine, but she's also had a lot of tests in the past. So she has had a long profile. She had a whisk previously and did not do particularly well.
mhm.
She has a history of difficulty with math. So having had the whisk and seeing the numbers off of that, knowing that math is very difficult, the Stanford Binet 20% of the test is quantitative reasoning. So that knocked that out. So then I went with the KABC. And then as a backup, I would have done the lighter.
So
And then
everybody
went on
needs to know that not every clinician makes that
distinction.
distinction, assessment, and thoughtful selection of what IQ test to do on a child.
Well, and part of the reason I can do that is I own so many tests.
Yep,
So I
that's
own
important.
the Woodcock Johnson, I own the Stanford Binet, I own all the Wechsler scales, I own the lighter, I own the C Tony, I own um da, 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 the CAS, I own a ton of tests. I have the NEPSI, I have the Ramble, I have the Wechsler memory scales. I have a very extensive test library, and part of the reason I have that is so that when I have a hypothesis on a kid, I can test the hypothesis and prove or disprove what I'm thinking. And
So,
go ahead.
so is it a parent's privilege right before they ask a diagnosis or before they choose to hire a diagnostician to do testing on their child to ask them one, do you do a pre-interview of the child before you do testing on them and sniff some things out? Two, how many different IQ tests do they have? And do they make their choice of which IQ test they do based on this pre-interview, um, you know,
You
sniffing
can
around?
ask them that. I can tell you that 95% of the time, the answer is going to be, I own the Wechsler scales.
Wow.
Like most clinicians, the tests are so expensive. Most clinicians buy a central battery and they use the same battery over and over again, and they'll add little bits and pieces here and there, but they don't have that extensive a test library because that they haven't been taught dynamic assessment in the same way that I've been taught. Like they're looking for IQ, achievement, gap, yes, no, we're good to go. And you do end up with neuropsychs that will have a more extensive test library, but neuropsychs often work with traumatic brain injury and Alzheimer's and epilepsy. And so it's nuance and it's part of the challenge, right? And so the key is to try and sniff out of the data that you have, which is why we're showing this, why we're trying to show more profiles, is to kind of look and see patterns. If we show you patterns, then you may be able to recognize those same patterns within your own child. That lets you get a better sense of what may be going on and how do I then find intervention.
But I think the term dynamic testing is something that we don't say often, and I probably it's because it doesn't happen often.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it is a real thing, and it's really important because I have seen the differences on different with kids that you've tried to figure out what's going on, what happens when you do more dynamic intervention testing.
Well, yeah, and this again, this particular student had been, this young lady had been tested by other clinicians, had been tested in the school district. And so I come in and look from a different perspective, and I'm always hypothesis testing what's going on and why. Okay.
And it's a bit more forensic.
Yeah. Except we don't use the term forensic
Oh,
in
sorry.
legal situation. No, it's okay. I use the term forensic in a legal case, and the oppositions was like, "Are you trained in forensics?" And I'm like, "What else do you just? How else do you describe going back and double checking?" Anyway,
Analytical. Yeah, whatever.
okay, so let's not get off track. We did the KABC, and we end up with scores that are as low as the fourth percentile, composite scores, index scores that are as low as the fourth percentile, and as high as the 81st percentile, meaning
Hmm.
we've got a ton of scatter. And we've got scores that fall in the 84th percentile for individual subtest scores and go down as low as the second percentile, and there's a ton of scatter there. Okay. So if I tell you sequential, number, order, and word recall are verbal tests, knowledge, verbal riddles, and verbal knowledge and riddles are language-based tests. Learning and rebus are a little bit language. What does your sniffer start suspecting?
Is
Maybe.
is she having receptive language issues in addition to expressive?
Yeah. Okay. So Um, the Kaufman has a really easy way. You just add two subtests and you have a nonverbal IQ. She continued to have difficulty with a task called hand movements, and this is a memory task where there are a series of hand movements, and because of those hand movements and you repeat them, um, if you can't remember them, that's a problem. Okay.
So
So
her score went up
her
for non.
score went up significantly.
Yeah.
So my bells and whistles are going off. I wanted to really look at memory. And I normally look at memory when I'm doing a comprehensive eval on a kid because memory plays such an important role. And so you can see that this particular student has real issues around verbal memory. Okay. So you read a story and they have to tell you the story back. And she had really poor recall, like little bits of facts and the rest was gone. It was like
Wow.
she had never heard most of it. Um, she had similar recall after a delay. So she didn't lose a lot of details, but the few that she had, she held on to.
Mm.
On the verbal learning task, I read you a series of words, tape, leaf, shoe, and I read you a long list of words and you have to repeat the list back. And I was just making those up, which is why there was pauses in there. And then I read the same list in the same order multiple times. And she could kind of begin to build. And by the final trial, she had more words. And then after the delay, she could remember those. So this is a kid who may not remember it initially, but if the information is repeated a couple of times, she's
Ah,
better able to hold on to it
okay.
and she can remember what she's heard.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't really a significant difference between the two stories. Like she wasn't better with one of the stories than the other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, her visual memory was better than her verbal memory. Oh, and I've got a typo in there. That should be an 82, not a 820. So
So
ignore that.
visual memory is, tell me, explain the task.
Visual memory. So on the picture memory, I show you, it's like in Highlights magazine where you see a
Yes.
picture, you look at it, you turn the page, and then you have to mark what was changed, moved, or added. Okay. And then on the design learning, I show you a complex design. You get to look at it for 10 seconds. I take it away. There's a pause. And then you have to draw what you saw. And then I show you the same card multiple times. Okay. Over a couple of trials. And what can you do? Okay.
Okay.
After the picture memory one, you get to look at the picture again to see how well you were able to find things that were changed, moved, or added if you want to. Not everybody does the delayed task, but I like to. And that additional exposure dramatically improved her recall.
So she needs
Yeah.
repetitive learning. I get it.
Yeah. Okay. So you start to see a pattern in all of this,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Okay. And then her recognition of what she saw was fairly good. Okay. And then we move into attention, concentration, memory.
Mm.
Finger windows is more of a visual task. Swiss cheese card, I put my pencil into one hole and then another, and then you have to do it on your side.
Mm-hmm.
And number a letter, I read you a series of letters and numbers, and you have to repeat them back exactly as you heard them. So that letter number memory is very similar to her number recall. So that short term, not necessarily meaningful information doesn't stick very well. Okay.
Was
So
she tested for ADHD before?
yes, and she's already on stimulant medication. Great question. Ding ding. Kim gets
But
a
it
little
didn't work. So that's been addressed.
does work. That's how poor her memory is.
Ooh. So she was on ADHD medication and it was the appropriate amount.
Fully therapeutic. She has got really, really poor memory.
How does that happen?
People are wired differently. Memory is not just attention.
It's not.
It's not. And let's hold that question because we're going to talk about that in another minute. Okay.
Okay, I'm writing it down because
All
I
right.
don't have memory.
All right. Rapid naming. Real issue. So that's, can she retrieve from long-term memory? And the answer is not quickly.
Nope.
Okay. And remember, those discrepancies mean relative to that nonverbal IQ of a 109, that's pretty low for her. And I use the nonverbal IQ because I think it's a better estimate of her true ability. Okay. All right. And the word retrieval. So it's both word retrieval and rapid naming. So if your brain is like a filing cabinet, somebody mixed her filing cabinet up, threw it back in, she can't find the files, and her files are currently not very full. Okay. All of the language things made me question, if there was an auditory processing issue.
Ah,
So I poked at that, and the answer is nothing really popped out. A little bit in language, a little bit in language. Okay.
most people
So-
don't know what auditory processing is, but it's real.
Okay. So auditory processing is your ability to interpret. So it's not about acuity. Can you hear sounds and can you hear them at different ranges? It's how does the brain interpret how the sound comes in through the ear and into the brain. And it's I don't want to get technical, signal to noise. The analogy I use for parents, and I apologize if any audiologists are listening, is if you pretend that you have earmuffs on and somebody is talking and it sounds kind of distorted, um, that's what it feels like. So you can put your hands over your ears as we're talking and feel the slight distortion. The other analogy I give is if you remember when we had landline phones and you had water on the phone line and it like crack and popple as you were listening, that signal wasn't coming through very clear and there was disruption. Okay. So it's not that. Okay. Are you surprised by the phonological processing?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay. So
Wow.
she could blend words, which is great,
Hmm.
but she took advantage of having them repeated.
Ah.
Okay. And she had something to anchor to because she was trying to recognize a word that helped her also remember the phonemes.
So again, that skill that the reason why the details of the guts of these tests are important to parents is that you also learn not just what's going wrong, but also how the kid learns better.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
kid needs repetition and she can succeed
Yeah.
in some areas. Yeah.
Okay. Not surprising, visual motor integration and visual perception, and then orthographic processing is horrible. Okay. Now we get to real meat.
Mm.
All right. What's your takeaway?
Wow. Oral language. Wow. And does this include expressive and receptive? This recalling sentences. Yeah. Expressive. Okay.
So,
Wow.
and her language memory is horrible. I didn't do the full receptive battery because as it was, we were already at 14, 15 hours of testing.
Oh dear God. Really? Wow.
And I was trying to, like, it was clear that there's a receptive piece because she's not remembering what she's heard, but I really
Mm.
wanted to understand where some of those issues were. So following directions was horrible for her. Like she couldn't
Mm.
remember what was said, and then she couldn't figure out how to sequence it. So on the task, you
Mhm.
have like a string of figures. You might have X's and O's and boxes and squares and circles, and um, the clinician will say, point to the third star after you point to the second triangle. And you have
Wow.
to interpret that and follow it, right? And so that was really difficult for her.
Mhm.
Word classes, I give you 3 or 4 words and I ask you to identify the 2 words that go together. And there
Oh
can be
boy.
different groupings. So it can be part whole, it can be classification, like, oh, they're both games. It can be
Mm.
synonyms, oh, they both have the same meaning. But there's no cue or clue as to what the relationship is. The kid has to figure out the relationship. And she often picked associations like um, boot and umbrella
Mhm.
rather than boot and shoe,
I see.
right? Like,
Mm.
and that's not a great example, but you get the idea,
Yeah.
right? Um, she had a hard time recalling sentences. Okay. Uh, Consistent with the story memory, when you gave her a spoken paragraph and then asked her to explain what had happened and make inferences from it, really, really difficult for her. And then there's two other big ones in here. She actually, and I know this is ironic to say fourth percentile is a relative strength. She actually did a little better where I gave her a picture and I gave her a word and I asked her to make a grammatically correct sentence about the picture using the word. Okay.
Mm.
So that was a little better. It's not like, woo, it's okay. Now, sentence assembly, I love this task. You've got words and phrases. The dog, the cat saw. And you have to create two different sentences using that. The dog saw the cat saw the dog. And you have the phrases there, so they're visual, and the clinician can repeat them and reread them, so it's not a reading task, but it measures that flexibility in creating different syntactic structures. And that, like, I thought her brain was going to fall on the floor and start flopping around because it was horrific for her. Like, struggled and tried 47 different combinations and just could not figure out how to put them in the right order and really struggled to create questions. Okay. And so that was super difficult. Okay. So then I take that and I want to understand what is, so Kim, define syntax in terms of grammar.
I was just like, I sometimes, so syntax is, it's the order of words or phrases in a sentence
To
to
create
make logical, what?
meaning. Yeah.
Create meaning, to make logical meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So grammatical morphemes is an analogy task where he is to she as brother is to,
Sister. Okay.
okay. And she used she would often use improper, she would over apply rules. Now, there's actually a term called deers where there are multiple species of deer, but where you would have incorrect plural forms. So you would say one duck is to two ducks, as one deer is to two, and she would say
She said dear.
deers. Again, that's not the right
Right.
version, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
She would over apply. One of the other classic one is uh fast is to faster as good is to, and everybody
Gooder.
some people say gooder, right?
Right.
And she had those same things going on, and I could hear it just in general conversation.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to plug into that, right?
Mhm.
On the sentence comprehension, I give you 4 pictures and I will say something, and then you have to tell me which of the 4 pictures it is.
Mhm.
And then I will give you 2 pairs of sentences, and you have to say if they mean the same thing or not. And that was better for her, ironically.
Because she had more context, or?
You have more context and she could hear the sentences again.
Hmm.
And then when I asked her to identify errors in sentences, she could not find the grammatical errors. Okay. So I know that's a lot of time to talk about language to kind of pull it apart, but it's this really critical piece. And of course, as always, we're going to go back to my infamous diagram and
Yes, do
remind
it.
parents that we have our receptive processes and our expressive processes. Listening is receptive, speaking is expressive. You can't tell I have dysgraphia. Reading is receptive, and writing is expressive. You have to listen to be able to speak. You have to listen to be able to read. You have to speak to be able to write. You have to read to be able to write. We have significant issues back in here with both interpreting language that's coming
Yes.
in and remembering language that's coming in.
Right.
And then it cascades throughout the entire
So that's really the source of all these different areas, is that receptive language, understanding. But she doesn't have auditory processing issues, so it's something different with language.
So then when you look at the reading,
Mm.
you can see that the system
Oh.
falls apart and her written expression is even worse.
Whew. That
Okay.
little, just to tell parents, that little square that Cindy drew for me, and I've been working on that for the past, I don't know how many years. It really is the key to a lot of things for you as a parent to express to others and for you to understand about your child.
Okay. You remember the question I asked you to write down?
Yes.
What was the question?
The question was, memory is not just attention. Short-term memory is not just attention, a deficit like ADHD kind of stuff.
Right.
More.
So what role does that short-term attention play in decoding? Or that
It should,
short-term memory, sorry, not short-term attention, short-term memory. What role does that play in decoding?
well, what I've seen kids is when we're decoding, which means taking apart a, let's just say a 3-syllable word, they can remember, they can take apart the first syllable of the word, they can take apart the second, but they forgot the first part of the word. And by the time they figure out the last part of the word, the third syllable, they can't repeat the word because they've just forgotten the first 2 syllables. Is that what you
Right.
mean?
So if we took Atlantic, right,
Mhm.
you would have them decode that, decode that, decode that. And then when you went to go back and blend the whole thing, they would have lost this and this.
Yes, it's gone. It's very, very tough on them.
And so then they have to go at, an, lan, ick, and then at, lan, and you have to go back and blend it as you go forward because otherwise they just cannot hold it. Okay.
Now, if,
Unfortunately, go
yeah,
ahead.
well, if with tons of remediation, it can improve for a dyslexic student, because all what I do is I widen the path so they can go back and retrieve this rapid automatic naming, or is that what it is? And they go and they can grab that sound and hold on to it better. I can't change their working memory. I can just make it easier. Is that correct?
You can build working memory skills and you do that gradually over time, but it's not as fast.
Right. It's maybe not as fast as other people, but they can get there.
Right. And we can enhance skill with practice, but you have to start where the student is, and
Right.
everybody starts where the student where they think the student should be. So what you're doing though with that practice and that blending and the over and over and over practice actually helps build that skill set.
Yes.
Now, what do you suspect the school district was doing with this particular child in terms of reading instruction?
My guess is they were teaching them to memorize words.
Yeah. Miss Emily Post had whole language, drill and kill, and they kept talking about how her reading was improved when she was reading in context. And the answer was yes, because she was guessing. And that's not actually teaching her how to read, it's teaching her how to guess, and that only gets you so far, and then she can't go to college.
And guessing and memorizing whole words, if there's a million words in the English language, that's not going to allow you to go to higher level reading.
Yeah.
You're
And
stuck.
then does it make sense why her spelling is so much lower than even her decoding?
Yeah. Yes. She has no idea of the connectivity between
Right.
sound symbol. Yeah, there's no.
Now, there's a really interesting difference between the Kaufman written expression and the OWLS, the oral and written language scales written expression. Do you know what the big difference is between the two tests? Well, there's
No, I do not.
so the KABC does not include spelling as a component of the assessment, and they actually tell the kid up front, don't worry if you don't know how to spell a word, spelling doesn't count.
You mean
Okay.
the oral doesn't, the owl doesn't
No, in
include
the
spelling.
Kaufman, on the written
Oh.
expression, if they make a spelling
Oh,
mistake, it doesn't count as an error
I see.
because they do a separate spelling test. is their
I
philosophy.
see.
If you make a grammatical error because of spelling, like you
Mhm,
put in off instead of, that
mhm,
counts. Okay.
right.
In the owls, spelling is counted, mechanics is dinged very heavily, grammar is dinged very heavily, and they score for more complex grammatical structure, so you get more points for that. It looks at mature vocabulary, it looks at a lot of different things. And so this particular student struggled to formulate grammatically correct sentences, in part because she can't do it back here, right? So
Mhm,
I can't even put the parts together when I have them sitting in front of me to make a grammatically correct sentence. And then you give me
mhm,
an open-ended prompt and I can't even do it. Even though
mhm.
words were written above that had the correct spelling, she couldn't bring that spelling down.
And
So
this kid's in 8th grade.
this kid is in 8th grade.
That's that's very this that's very tough for this kid.
Yeah. Now, why would she do better on this writing fluency? I've got a picture in 3 words, and I
Mhm.
have to write as many sentences as I can. Why is that a better score for her, Kim?
Well, because she's got the picture for her content and she has an idea of what's going on by analyzing the picture.
Yeah.
And then you're also giving her 3 words, which gives her a buffer, a bonus
Yeah.
to help her use some kind of expressive in her
The
written language.
pictures aren't deep context. I mean, you see a picture of pig, and the words
Oh,
pig fat is, and you have to
mhm,
write the pig is fat, right?
okay.
So on the really simple ones, it's just like adding a word or two and you get a sentence, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's interesting. And then why would math be weak?
Because to do any kind of math computation, so that you can get to the analytical math, you have to be able to have a memory and be able to recall, um, pulling.
Processes, math facts.
Yeah. If you're doing long division, you have to remember what you just did in order to go to the next step.
Mhm.
Multi-step math would be almost impossible.
Yeah. You also have to understand the language of instruction.
Mhm,
And she's got gaps and holes in her ability to understand the language instruction.
mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
So obviously, this is a super complex profile. Obviously, things had been missed in the past. Now, she had had speech language services, but the speech language services were not robust enough and not frequent enough.
Right.
Um, she needed structured literacy, which is phonics, syllable types, morphology, word origins, syntax, what parts of speech are used, how do we use different syntactic structures, how do we then infer meaning from text, how do we find literal meaning from text. She needs all of that curriculum done. And I know for some people using the term structured literacy or the science of reading is taboo, but
It
the
is truly a
science
science,
of
though.
reading, yeah.
We haven't
Science of
used
reading.
science of reading for a long time in our education system. Sorry.
So, yeah, prior to the 1970s, we actually used
Yeah,
phonics. It was great.
yeah.
So this is a kid who the primary work, like the first emphasis, should be on speech language services, where we've got to get her in with a good speech language pathologist to build how language works and why. Because if we just jump straight into pure reading without building that, she's decoding without meaning, right? And we want her to have meaning. We want her to know. I wish I'd had time to do multiple meanings of words with her because I know it would have been horrific for her.
Mhm,
We want her to, when she sees the word bat, to think both of the physical bat and the flying animal.
mhm,
We want her to be able to dynamically build sentences. We want her to be able to understand word order in sentences and how does it change meaning. Only the elephant ate the banana. The elephant only ate the banana. Two completely different sentences, and all we've done is moved a word, right? Then we do all of the decoding instruction. We also have to do written language instruction. So the spelling comes with the decoding. So decoding and encoding. Encoding is a spelling piece. So the spelling comes with that. The handwriting I was less worried about. I want her to keyboard.
yeah.
we're going to work on syntactic structures. We're going to work, so spelling, mechanics. So we need to teach capitalization and punctuation, syntactic structure. How do we make different grammatical structures? And then later on, we work on the cohesion coherence part. How do I link my ideas together, and how do I help make sure that my reader understands what I'm trying to say? And then in math, we need to go back and build deeper understanding of math concepts in terms of terminology, altogether difference, all of that vocabulary that comes with it, making sure that she's got an easy way to retrieve math facts, so addition multiplication chart. Because if we use that consistently, neurons that fire together wire together. So every time she gets 4 times 8 is 32, because she's always looking it up the same, we build stronger neural pathways.
So you're saying eventually she'll memorize that math
Yeah,
fact.
because she gets it the same way every single time.
Yeah, repetitive.
And then we build math concepts more gradually and systematically. We build things up, and we can give a cue book. Like we talk about a trigger book for
Trigger
math.
math book. Yep.
Yeah, where you've got samples of how to complete the problems, and the fact that you see it the same way every time, and you've helped write the instructions for how to put those steps in. We're going to help cement that math process for her.
So that trigger book, because I've done this with several kids, including my own, this short-term working memory issue really is the reason for the trigger book. Because if you knew how to do division on Friday and by Monday you say, I don't remember, all you do is you look at your trigger book. Oh yeah, I remember step 1, step 2, step 3. It's still there.
Yeah.
Just not retrievable quickly.
Right. And by seeing it the same way every single time, then we build that memory and we build that repetition, and we're more likely to remember it. And remember, this particular student does better when they see things multiple times the same way, same thing over and over again. I can do better retrieval.
Yeah.
So I am optimistic about this young lady because I know that they've gotten some significant changes in the intervention that she's going to get. Did a lot of advocacy with the school. It's a complex profile. And I think probably the most important thing she left feeling after all of the testing was that she was smart. Make sure that she knew that she's got great pattern recognition skills, that she can figure out what's happening when there's subtle nuances in pictures to tell a story, that she can think in 3 dimensions, that she's got really great strengths, and those strengths will serve her well in whatever she does.
Yep.
And that just because these things are hard for her now doesn't mean they will always be. Because you and I have seen amazing
Crazy
transformations when students get the right intervention.
Absolutely.
Questions or comments by people, we'd love to hear from you. We would love to analyze profiles. So if you would like to have us look at your student's profile, we're happy to do that analysis because we think that this helps other parents become a better detective in their own student's profile. Again, I know we give very complex and complete profiles, but hopefully you can start seeing patterns yourself to help you sniff out what's going on with your own student. Thanks.